Hello. So for this week, we're going to be discussing the work of Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers and their influences on personality and psychology slash therapy as well. So let's get into that. So Maslow is generally considered the founder and even the spiritual leader of the humanistic psychology movement. He objected to both behaviorism and psychoanalysis. In particular, he didn't like Freud's approach to personality. According to Maslow, when psychologists study only abnormal patients or emotionally disturbed patients, the sample of humanity that they are working from and their framework from ignores many of the positive qualities of humanity, such as happiness, peace of mind, contentment, things like that. And so Maslow believed that the psychologists in the field of psychology were underestimating human nature, and that they failed to examine the best in people, and that is the most creative, healthy, and mature individuals. His theory does not derive from the case histories of clinical patients, but rather from research from creative, independent, self-sufficient, fulfilled adults. He concluded that each person is born with the same set of instinctive needs that enable us to grow, develop, and to fulfill our potential. So for a lot of people, when they hear the name Abraham Maslow, they immediately recall his hierarchy of needs. It's definitely the hallmark of his work. And what Maslow proposed was that there were a hierarchy of 5 innate needs that work to activate and direct human behavior. So these needs, they are the psychological safety, belongingness and love, esteem, and self-actualization needs. Maslow described these needs as instinctoid, and by this he meant that they have a hereditary component. So the needs are arranged in order from strongest at the bottom to weakest at the top. Maslow believed that the lower needs must be partially satisfied before the higher needs become influential. So, for example, the lower needs are the physiological needs, which are for food, water, sex. And if someone is near starvation, that need for food is going to take precedence over a higher level need, such as esteem from others. People aren't worried about whether they're getting esteem from others if they're about to die of starvation. So the lower level needs need to be at minimally partially fulfilled before we go on to the next need. So therefore, we are not all driven by the same needs or all of the needs at the same time. And generally, it's thought that only one need at a time dominates our personality, and therefore only that need will drive us at that time. So again, the lower the level of the need in the hierarchy, the greater its strength, potency, and priority. The higher the needs are, the weaker the needs are. Higher needs appear later in life. It makes sense that the need for self-actualization isn't going to be prominent for most 6-year-olds, where the need for food and water is. So that makes pretty much sense for me. Hope it does for you. Because higher needs are less necessary for actual survival, their gratification can be postponed. So in a sense, failure to satisfy a higher need does not necessarily produce a crisis. Failure to satisfy a lower need can produce a crisis. So for this reason, Maslow called lower needs deficit or deficiency needs. Failure to satisfy them produces a deficit or a lack in the individual. Nevertheless, higher needs are less necessary for survival. They can contribute to our personal growth. Satisfaction of higher needs leads to improved health, happiness, contentment, fulfillment, and longevity. And for this reason, Maslow called higher needs either growth needs or being needs. And here we have an illustration of the hierarchy of needs. Okay, physiological needs. So if you've ever been swimming and have been under the water and had to struggle to get up to get air, or if you've ever really gone too long without eating or drinking water, you can probably understand how trivial the need for love or esteem can seem at that time when your body is experiencing a physiological deficiency. A starving person cares only about food. Nevertheless, once that need is satisfied, the person is no longer driven by it. Then the need ceases to direct or control one's behavior. And that's kind of the situation for most of us in industrialized, affluent cultures. Our physiological needs are met, and they don't have as much of a driving force in our personalities. Physiological needs have a greater personal impact as motivating factors and motivating forces in cultures and places where basic survival remains an everyday concern. Maslow believed that needs for safety and security are important drives for infants and neurotic adults. Emotionally healthy adults have usually satisfied their safety needs, a condition that requires stability, security, and freedom from fear and anxiety. For infants and children, safety needs can be seen clearly in their behavior because these young individuals react visibly and immediately to any threat to their security. Another visible indication of children's safety needs is their preference for structure or routine, for an orderly and predictable world. Maslow said that neurotic and insecure adults also need structure and order because their safety needs are still dominant in their personality. Neurotics compulsively avoid new experiences. They arrange their world to make it predictable, budgeting their time and organizing their possessions. Once our physiological and safety needs have been reasonably well satisfied, we attend to the needs for belongingness and love. These needs can be expressed through a close relationship with a friend, with a lover or a mate, or through social relationships formed within groups. Maslow suggested that failure to satisfy the need for love is a fundamental cause of emotional maladjustment. So once we have loved and we feel loved and we have a sense of belonging, we may find ourselves driven by two forms of the need for esteem. Maslow felt that we require esteem and respect from ourselves in the form of feelings of self-worth and from other people in the form of status, recognition, or social success. When we lack self-esteem, we feel inferior, helpless, and discouraged with little confidence in our ability to cope. So when Maslow speaks of self-actualization, he's speaking of the fullest development of the self. And so the highest need in Maslow's hierarchy was or is self-actualization. And this involves the maximum realization and fulfillment of our potentials, of our talents, and of our abilities. Although a person may satisfy all the other needs in the hierarchy, if that person is not self-actualizing, he or she will be restless, frustrated, discontent. So the following conditions are necessary in order for us to satisfy self-actualization. First, we must be free of constraints imposed by our society. We must not be distracted by lower-level needs. We must be secure in our self-image and in our relationships with other people, and we must be able to love and be loved in return. Number 4, we must have a realistic knowledge of our strengths and weaknesses, virtues, and vices. Later, Maslow proposed a second set of innate needs, the cognitive needs, to know and understand. And these needs exist outside of the hierarchy that we've already described. The need to know is stronger than the need to understand and must therefore be at least partially satisfied before the need to understand can emerge. According to Maslow's theory, self-actualizers differ from others in terms of their basic motivation. Maslow proposed a distinct type of motivation for self-actualizers, which he called meta-motivation. So meta-motivation implies that a condition in which motivation, as we know it, plays no role. Self-actualizers are not motivated to strive for a particular goal. Instead, they're said to be developing from within. Self-actualizers are concerned with fulfilling their potential and with knowing and understanding their environment. Their goal is to enrich their lives by acting to increase tension so as to experience a variety of stimulating and challenging events. Maslow's research on emotionally healthy people formed the basis of his personality theory. He did not find many examples of self-actualizers and actually estimated that they constitute only about 1% or less of the general population. However, he concluded that they do share some common characteristics. And these characteristics include an efficient perception of reality, an acceptance of themselves, others, and nature, a spontaneity, simplicity, and naturalness, a focus on problems outside of themselves, a sense of detachment and the need for privacy, a freshness of appreciation, mystical or peak experiences, social interests, profound interpersonal relations, creativeness, and resistance to enculturation or social pressures. All right, so let's look at Carl Rogers. So Carl Rogers originated a popular approach to psychotherapy known initially as non-directive or client-centered therapy, which later became known as person-centered therapy. And this form of psychotherapy has generated an enormous amount of research and is widely used today in multiple counseling situations. Rogers' personality theory, like Maslow's, is rooted in humanistic psychology, which Rogers made the framework for the patient-therapist relationship. Interesting enough is that Rogers also referred to his patients as clients. So if we consider the phrase person-centered therapy, it tells us that the ability to change and improve personality is centered within the person. In other words, it is the person, the client, the patient, and not the therapist who directs such change. The therapist's role is to assist or facilitate change. That is the role of any good therapist. The therapist can't make anyone change. It is our goal to assist clients to find, discover, and make the change they are looking for. They make the change. It's their work. So because of this emphasis on the conscious and the present, Rogers believed that personality could only be understood from our own viewpoint based on our subjective experiences. So Rogers proposed one single innate overriding motivation, and that is the inborn tendency to actualize, to develop our abilities and potentials to their fullest. Rogers believed that people are motivated by their innate tendency to actualize, maintain, and enhance their self, and that this drive towards self-actualization is part of a larger actualization tendency, which encompasses all of our physiological and psychological needs. Even though such changes are genetically determined, progress towards full human development is neither automatic nor effortless. To Rogers, the process involves struggle and pain. So an example might be someone who's driven to learn how to walk or ride a bike is going to fall down, etc., but their drive towards progress is going to keep them moving forward even though they're falling and struggling and experiencing pain in their goals. So the governing process throughout the lifespan, in Rogers' view, is what he called the organismic valuing process. Throughout this process, we will evaluate all of life's experiences by how well they serve the actualization tendency. Rogers wanted to know how we perceive and react to this multifaceted world of experiences to which we are constantly exposed. And Rogers answered the questions by saying, by saying that the reality of our environment depends on our perception of it, which may not always coincide with reality. We react to experiences far differently from the way that our best friend does. And our experiences then become the only basis for our judgments and behaviors. Higher levels of development sharpen our experiential world and ultimately lead to the development of the self. In Rogers' view, as the self emerges, infants develop a need for what Rogers called positive regard. This is a common theme you're going to hear throughout the work of Rogers, positive regard. It includes acceptance, love, and approval from other people, and most notably from the mother during infancy. This need is probably learned, although Rogers said that the source wasn't that important. The need for positive regard is universal and persistent. All right, so now we're going to talk about unconditional positive regard. So even though infants may receive sufficient acceptance, love, and approval, some of their specific behaviors might bring punishment. However, if positive regard for the infant persists, despite the infant's undesirable behaviors, the condition is called unconditional positive regard. By this, Rogers meant that the mother's love for the child is granted freely and fully. It's not conditional, nor is it dependent on the child's behavior. When we talk about positive self-regard, so in time, positive regard will come more from within than from other people. And so this is what Rogers called positive self-regard. Positive self-regard can be defined as a feeling of contentment with oneself and is related to positive mental health. Like positive regard, positive self-regard is reciprocal. When people receive positive regard and develop positive self-regard, in turn they are likely to provide positive regard to others. So when we speak of conditions of worth, to Rogers, it's a belief that we are worthy of approval only when we express desirable behaviors and refrain from expressing those type of behaviors that bring disapproval from others, similar to the Freudian superego. And so conditional positive regard is the opposite of conditions of worth. Parents may not react to everything their infant does with positive regard. Some behaviors annoy, frighten, or bore them, and for those behaviors they may not provide affection or approval. Thus, infants learn that parental affection has a price. It depends on behaving in a certain acceptable ways. They come to understand that sometimes they are prized and sometimes they aren't. So when we talk about incongruence, this is defined as a discrepancy between a person's self-concept and the aspects of his or her experience. So experiences that are incongruent or incompatible with our self-concept because they are threatening and they are manifested as anxiety. So for example, if our self-concept includes the belief that we love all humanity, once we meet someone toward whom we feel hatred, we are likely to develop anxiety because our life experience is incongruent with our presuppositions. Our level of psychological adjustment and emotional health is a function of the degree of congruence or compatibility between our self-concept and our experiences. Psychologically healthy people are able to perceive themselves, other people, and events in their world as much as they really are. To Rogers, the fully functioning person is the most desirable end result of the psychological development and social evolution. He describes several characteristics of fully functioning, self-actualizing people. Fully functioning persons are aware of all experiences. Fully functioning persons live fully and richly in every moment. All experiences are potentially fresh and new. Experiences cannot be predicted or anticipated, but are participated in fully rather than merely observed. Fully functioned persons trust in their own organism. So by this phrase, Rogers meant that Fully functioning people trust their own reactions rather than being guided by the opinions of others. Fully functioning persons feel free to make choices without constraints or inhibitions. So this brings a sense of power because people know their future depends on their own actions and not present circumstances, past events, or other people. They don't feel compelled either by themselves or by others to behave in one certain way. Fully functioning persons are creative and live constructively and adaptively as environmental conditions change. And being fully functional is not always easy. Being fully functional involves continually testing, growing, striving, and using all of one's potential, a way of life that brings complexity and challenge.